Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for Life Interrupted. Honolulu Magazine is happy to bring back a second season of Life Interrupted. We're calling this one Navigating What's Next. We're so happy you could join us, whether you're joining us on our website or whether you're joining us on Facebook. Thank you and welcome, and we'll have more information on our website, and you'll be able to catch up on this later on our website in case you have to duck out or do some work or hang out with your kids or all the many things we have to do these days. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We're so fortunate to have amazing panelists, our experts again, who are going to help us sort through everything that's going on. We first off are welcoming back Pastor Dan Chun from First Presbyterian Church. And we are also happy to have Dr. Alana Coffey, who we pulled her away from her practice to come and practice on us today. So we're happy to have her. You can read all about their longer bios on our website, but we want to get right to the questions. We're once again welcoming back Masisa Gass, who is the Program Director for Mental Health America of Hawaii, and always a great resource for us. And we're happy to be joined for the first time by Dr. Josie Harita, from the Kahala Clinic for Children and Family, and somebody else right from the front lines. And we're also happy to have back Kathleen Rhodes Merriam. Kathleen has joined us before and is always so great about sharing with us what she's doing in the community and at work, where she is the supervisor of the Windward Community Mental Health Center. And I'm Robbie Digman. I'm editor-at-large at Honolulu Magazine and happy to be the moderator and get to find out firsthand some tips for dealing with everything that we've been dealing with for this whole pandemic. So thank you all. So that's the thing. Let's just start right there. So many things have changed, and it's changed again. And I just wanted to start with, if each of you can tell me a little bit about how are you feeling right now, or how are the people you're talking to feeling right now? Dan, could I get you to start?
Sure. I think it's just a wide spectrum of how people are responding. I mean, for some people, like my introvert friends, they just are having a great time being home alone. And their biggest thing is, should I keep eating ramen every day or add some chashu or some green onions? But then on the other side of this spectrum are those who, it's like a big stretched rubber band, and they've just had it. They love their spouse, but to be with the spouse every day, every hour, or their kids, they love their kids, but it's really hard. And it's and even those who live alone, they liked it at first, but now it's kind of a feeling of enough is enough. When can this stop? And there's just more tension and more anxiety, and for those who came into it with some issues, I think they've got to more emphasize. And it's been so there is a wide gamut, but definitely most of the people are just having a difficult time, and it gets prolonged, and they're just wanting a sense of hope, and that things might turn around uh, completely, but I don't think they will turn around completely. But so anyway, I just see this wide variety of how people are responding.
For sure, it's a process. Dr. Coffey, you're working a lot, I'm sure. Tell us about what it's like from your side.
It's same, very much the same as Dan has mentioned. And I think that about 2/3 of my cases were already in existence with me before the pandemic. About another third are maybe a result of the pandemic. But the ones that were there before the pandemic has worsened or exacerbated whatever it was that they were dealing with. So if it was a depression, it's deepened. If it was anxiety, it certainly worsened. Divorces have actually become more contentious. It's so the issues that were there prior have worsened because of this pandemic. And you're right about those introverts. At first, they were doing stellar. They liked staying home anyway, and they felt like their friends and neighborhood now knew what they were going through. It's like we're all kind of grounded. Now even they want to go out. So, people are definitely at a stretching point, a breaking point, and just wanting life to be less scary. Maybe not even to go back to the way it was, just to be less scary.
Misty, so what do you think? I'm hearing that from people too. While we're feeling kind of happy and gleeful to be able to do a little bit more, none of us are really ready to run out and embrace what we did before.
Absolutely. I think for those who had diagnosable issues previously or currently, that's a different kind of situation in terms of needing to get that support. But the thing that I've been hearing the most is kind of this epidemic of languishing. And you're going to see some of that language popping up in different articles on the news. And some people are asking, like, what is that? And what that basically is a feeling of apathy or restlessness, like the things that you're trying or that used to work to feel good, it just doesn't have the same interest. You feel like everything's monotonous, there's stagnation, things are empty. So though we have this feeling of like, okay, we're getting more freedom, it's a little bit safer because we have different things like the vaccination starting, we're going back out and getting that little bit of freedom and just not getting the return. And I think that's surprising for people. So it's really important to know that you have to try different things, new things that maybe you weren't going to do before because this used to work but doesn't work anymore. And to normalize the fact that that feeling of stagnation and monotony is part of a lot of people's experience right now. And there is hope that we can do different types of self-care to get that moving again.
Dr. Harita, what are you hearing from your patients?
Well, you brought up a really good point about change, right? This is another change. We just spent like a year of this pandemic, and now they're saying, hey, we might need to leave this pandemic world and re-engage again. And with anything with change, you're going to have so many different emotions out there, right? You're going to be afraid, you're going to be excited, you're going to be, and with all these mixed emotions, people are still feeling unsettled. And what do we do and whatnot? So, we have to kind of look at, well, what is it that we're missing when we were in the pandemic? And for the most part, it was based on isolation. And so I'm kind of hoping, like with this new change coming on, is how do we start to reconnect? Because again, that whole year of just isolation, and I agree with Mestiza, right? It's just such a weight. And so yeah, people are feeling hopeful, but at the same time, there's just a bag of emotions.
Kathleen, I remember something really interesting the last time we talked a year ago about this, and you said some of the people who'd been dealing with chronic mental illness were like, hey, we got this. We're used to having to deal with a lot of stress. You people kind of need to come along and join in. What are you experiencing now out there in your world?
Sorry, the word that comes to mind is exhaustion. I'm finding that and observing so many people expressing that they're just so tired of this and really feeling kind of run down. So I think the clients that we have are, I guess I was thinking by now they might be a little more enthusiastic about coming in because we're opening more. So those face-to-face visits would be so much more exciting for them, but they're kind of like, well, yeah, okay, we can now come in. They seem okay with that, but there's still that hesitation. The providers that I work with, they're kind of the same, like, well, now we're coming in a little more, but just seem tired. And I think when you sustain this period of time, I mean, over a year of this high, needing to perform at such a high level of just energy output constantly, and then fearful for your own safety, fearful for your own stress level, managing parents, managing kids, trying to hang on to a job, house payments. I mean, it goes on and on, right? So when we manage at this level, and then kind of the reality is that things are getting safer, so we really could ramp down a little. We're still so stressed. So I think people are feeling quite exhausted. That's my observation.
That's for sure. I know we're hearing that from a lot of people, and that's one of the reasons we're so thankful to all of you for joining us, and we're thankful to our sponsors for bringing us back for a second session of Life Interrupted. again, this one's navigating what's next. We want to say a special mahalo to our sponsors. Our presenting sponsors are the Kahala Clinic for Children and Family and Brain Health Hawaii. Our silver sponsor is Hawaii Association of Independent Schools, and our community sponsors are NAMI Hawaii and Mental Health Hawaii, Mental Health America of Hawaii. So thank you all for joining us. We have on that slide, we have websites, so you can also find a lot of resources from each of these, our sponsors, because all of them are involved in continuing tips for these issues and any others. So thank you to our sponsors, and let's get back to it. Tips. We're all looking for tips. That's why we put this one up higher. Normally we go for, let's discuss something more seriously first, but let's just get right to some of the tips for dealing with all of these changes. We touched upon it a little bit already. We're feeling worse even when things are better. We're getting more anxious in some ways. I read something that somebody said, well, no wonder none of us have been on a real vacation. I mean, there's just so much to deal with. Which one of you would like to tackle tips first? I won't make Dan go first every single time. All right, I'll pick on Dr. Harita. Dr. Josie, do you have tips for dealing with these changes? You see people of all different ages, you've got a family, well, you're dealing with things yourself as well as professional burnout. What are some of the tips you have for getting through this strange transitional time?
Yeah, again, the one thing that we do have now that we didn't have last year was our experience of being in the pandemic. And so in many ways, to help us reduce some of our anxiety is to say, hey, we've been there, right? And so if there is going to be a shutdown, or if there's not going to be any schools or sports, or, you have to stay at home for work, etc., we already have, in a sense, a manual for that. So my biggest tip is, just gather your family and nuclear extended and just talk about like, hey, let's look at this year and what are the lessons learned? And what are we going to do if there's no school this summer, right? Like they promise us, hey, you can go back to school, and then there's another strain. There's going to be another shutdown. What did we do? How can we improve that? Or, hey, it worked, so let's continue with that. So in many ways, to help reduce that anxiety is to reflect as a family, as a community, to say, what worked, and let's have that as our manual so that if it ever happens again, we got this.
That's great to think of. We already got the manual. That is comforting somehow, even if we forget it and have to go back and review certain chapters a whole lot of different times. I wanted to remind everyone listening that you folks attendees can ask a question of our panel by using the Q&A button. So anytime, we'll keep an eye on the Q&A button. Me and my partner, our producer, Christy Davis, we're keeping an eye on that. And so we will work in the questions. But for now, we know you folks all want to hear more of the tips. So we're going to go next to Dr. Alana. How about some tips for dealing with all of this?
I love the idea of we've done this already. I think that's really comforting. And so I want to highlight that again. Also, I want to ask people to manage their expectations. I know that my clients are like, great, let's just rush back out and do what we once did before. And I think that, and then they are going out and they're disappointed, or they're going out and it just feels different. So I'm asking people, manage your expectations. Go slow, take your time, be deliberate and thoughtful about what you do next. I don't think it's entirely safe for people to resume life as they once did. So I'm also asking people to, be mindful of crowds and just, safety, and still know who they're with. Also, when I know that people are also having a hard time accessing mental health. So I wanted to encourage people, as a tip, to join groups and take classes. If you can't get your one-on-one, there's still a lot of help out there. Go to clergy, go to some of the more traditional sites of support if you need to as well. But there are groups and classes when you cannot get an individual therapist, there's still services out there for you. And don't be afraid of telehealth. This is a game changer. I love it. And you might see my cat running around back there, but we can still have a meaningful engagement this way.
That's a great segue to Pastor Dan. I mean, can you tell us about, for example, how many people you normally were seeing on a weekly basis and how many you've seen lately and how you're still reaching out to them?
Oh my goodness. Well, normally we have about 1,200 on a Sunday morning, and we're just starting to go back into in person, and we have like 120. So that's like 10% of what we used to have. And I love what's already been said, that we really have to manage expectations. I don't have any expectations we're going to be packed very soon. And it's just different when you come to church. They're 10 feet away if they're singing, or 6 feet away if they're not singing. And I think we have to realize this is not just a snowstorm. It really is the ice age. It's going to be a very long time for things to come back as quote unquote normal, and everything's going to be the new normal. And I think we talked about before, it's almost like being in London during World War II, where for 5 years they were in the subways, which they called the tube, and hiding there, sending their kids to the countryside for safety because of the blitzkrieg, the bombing, and they hung in there for 5 years. And we're going to have that kind of mentality, like wartime mentality. This is a war against a disease. I would just add one more tip, and that would be the real helpfulness of being authentic. If we can just be authentic with one another and just saying, I am depressed, I am hurting, I'm really feeling lonely. And there's actually courage in that. There's strength in saying that. It doesn't mean you're a wimp or you're weak. You're actually saying something really good. And it's the pathway to health, because the community can get involved. And that would also be the other way, that if you think your friend is in trouble or is in a bad way, to be a bit intentional. I've been told, and the therapist friends here can either affirm or deny, but I'm told, even if you think a friend is going to do harm to him or herself, to just ask, are you doing okay? Are you having thoughts of hurting yourself? And it doesn't plant a seed in their mind that, gee, I never thought about that, I think I'm going to do it. But actually, it is helpful. It means you care. You're asking that question. And then, of course, you might have to ask some questions like, do you have a plan? Because that would make it much more serious, and there needs to be some professional help to get in there. But being authentic can be the golden ticket for a lot of this stress we're feeling right now.
And Kathleen, I know we've talked a lot about this, about just talking and asking people and listening to the answer. What are some of the things that you think are helping people out there now?
I think a tip is really about pacing oneself. And that also ties into expectations and what we think we can or should do. But I know that I am trying to pace myself. I tend to start the day and try, I start out with a plan, and maybe that whole plan goes to, pieces, but I want to regroup. I'm trying to focus on, my medication, my sleep, my eating, just kind of back to the basics. And if those things are out of whack, then I'm going to be out of whack completely. And then that means my family is going to be out of whack. And so I can't stress enough about some basic daily routines. And because the pandemic can often turn all those routines upside down. So I think pacing oneself, managing those expectations, I think all those are great things. And then just checking in with yourself, checking in with others, those are great tips. Taking more care and having more intention with conversations also. So it's kind of a theme of slowing down and trying to being more intentional. I think that's a really good tip. That's, I think, what helps with one's mental health.
Ms. Tisa, you had used a metaphor that I really liked before when you talked about self-care and the baking analogy. Can you share that one with us?
I love to bake. I don't think I'm excellent at it, but I like to do it. And so I think sometimes it's self-care when you really boil it down into its simplest recipe, if you will, is that the basics are just what Kathleen was talking about: to take good care of yourself, eat well, sleep well, go for that walk, and make sure you have those in. And then once you have those in place, you can start to do those other things that are more about learning new coping skills, practicing them, making sure you have a really great support system. And for me, it's a lot about not judging. So when you say, like, maybe I haven't talked to this person in a while, then call them. Or maybe I do need a few more people in my support system. Like, that's okay. It's all a learning process. And that's what this past year has done. It's taught us what we need and what we need to get more of. And I think the sprinkles are the fun part. And of course, I love the sprinkles. And so it's okay to say the things that didn't feel, that things that used to feel good, that they don't feel good anymore. I love classical literature. I'm not reading classical literature. It's not where my brain is, and that's okay. I'm reading like mysteries and thrillers and things that I used to consider more my beach reads, but that's what brings me joy. And so I've leaned into it. I'm sharing them with people saying, hey, I really like this one. And that's kind of what we're looking at, to go ahead and find new joys, lean into those joys, and then share it. Because if we're languishing, we really need to have that person who's able to kind of pick themselves up and share some of that sunshine with us. And so find a new joy, share it. And I think you said something really great, which was talking about vacations. Like, how long has it been? If you are privileged enough to be able to take some time off, think about that and see if you can't schedule that. Even if you're not going on a vacation, schedule a staycation and really invest in self-care on that day or two.
Yeah, that's great. I was listening to some homework for this, and it was a company, and they were dealing with what do you do when you transition people back to work. And one of the things that company was doing on the mainland is that they did give everyone time off to get vaccinated. And if they weren't feeling well, they told them to stay home and not take a day. And then they also gave them one recharge day to use. And I thought, oh, that's a fun idea, because I think there's that hope that there's a fabulous vacation waiting. So we're just going to kind of suck it up until we get there. And so I think that that's so wise to go and plan something already. We've already gotten some questions, so we'll get to those in a minute, but I wanted to start off with this one, as I think it's very important for us. What warning signs should we be looking for in ourselves and others? That's one of the things that also came up in our questions. Who wants to take that first of our therapist friends? Maybe Dr. Coffey, would you like to tackle that one first?
Well, let's see. Poor sleep. I think, people's sleeping schedule has been very disrupted. So not getting enough sleep or not getting good quality sleep is, it's, I can't even say enough about how important that is, because that leads to both mental health and physical health. So making sure that there's good sleep. Also, if you haven't heard from a person in a while and they've withdrawn and that's not their norm, that's their norm, that's what they're doing. But if this is someone that's been fairly social and all of a sudden they're not present in an important kind of way, reach out, that kind of social withdrawal. And also anger. There's a fair amount of anger out there in the ether. And I guess what I would say about that anger is it's there, and not to be reactive to it. Anger is one of those things that triggers other angers. But if someone is angry, recognize that that's really them hurting, and be more curious about it. But there's a lot of anger, and we don't need to respond in kind. And that's one of the things that I'm noticing in both friends, family, and in my clients. Lots of tension and anger.
Ms. Tisa, would you like to go next? I will add one thing that I heard recently that someone suggested, who was not a therapist, but who was just somebody who's dealing with their family, and thought of something I thought was helpful, was that they tried to embrace every time we complain about something, after they complain, they have to say something they're grateful for. And I thought, I wonder if I can get my family to do that. I think that one's kind of good. Even if I start with just myself, maybe that'll be a good idea. But what are some of those other warning signs that we should be looking for, and how do we kindly redirect them without saying, hey, you sound messed up, which I think is sometimes our veneer of civilization has been worn a little thin by this.
I think that the warning signs are absolutely the ones that Dr. Coffey kind of pointed out, looking at those basics, the eating, sleeping, connecting with other people. How are they doing if it's for our youth? How are they doing with education in school? How are they doing with getting just basic work things done? But we also know, because we're all being affected, that there's going to be moments when we just don't have it. There's going to be a day or two when you're really struggling, that your mood's going to be down, or your anxiety is going to be up for many different reasons. And so that doesn't mean that we have to immediately step in, that we can and start to have those conversations, but really we're looking at pervasive changes in someone's kind of mood, behavior, and kind of attitude for more than 2 weeks. That's our really big kind of place that we start to say, okay, this isn't something that I normally see from them, and it's been 2 weeks. Otherwise, we can say, this could just be part of that normal experience that we're all going through. And I think that first step is just to say, it's okay to not be okay. I have those days, you have those days, let's talk about that. And I think that's a really great way to both like validate how someone feels, normalize everyone's experience, and then open up a conversation that doesn't feel very directed at just one person, because you're joining them there. And I think that's a wonderful way to kind of assess and talk about what's happening, and then to start to see like what's been working for me, what's been working for you, what are things that we can change.
Do any of you want to tackle any other particular things about warning signs or tips for helping to nudge folks in a more positive direction or in a getting help way? Because those are great answers, and I don't want to belabor a question when we have so many other good questions coming in. But if there's something anybody
Yeah.
wants to jump in with, go ahead. Otherwise, we
I was
might
just
hop to the. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking a couple things. One is that to kind of observe our self-talk, and I think we know we're getting into depression when our self-talk are these great summary statements like "I'm not good enough," "I'll never amount to anything," "I've never accomplished anything in my life," and those are indicators, at least for me, that something's going on, or maybe the sarcasm rate is just taking off. Sometimes our church has sarcasm. I'm sorry, we have a lot of sarcasm in our church. No, but sometimes in our church we go through fasts, and I say, for this season, it doesn't have to be a food or a drink or a meal. You can pick something else. And some of my friends pick sarcasm to fast that for 40 days. Super hard. But during this time, it's really super hard because we can just be negative on a lot of different things. And I guess I wanted to throw in one other thing. I think it was Dr. Coffey who said, maybe you could talk to a clergy person. There was a national study of who does a person go to when they first are in trouble. And I was surprised the study said, whether you're a church person or not a church person, that 80% of the people would look for a pastor in their neighborhood. It could be a church that they used to go to or a wedding. And sometimes that's just helpful that if they, especially now, if it's a hard time to get to see a therapist, a pastor could be a listening ear and a referral point, because like our church, we keep a list of therapists who we can recommend. Do they want a psychiatrist, marriage, family? Do they need HMSA? Do they need Kaiser? Do they want a woman, a male? They want a religious person, a non-religious person? But we can be a great referral and a listening ear, and it's just kind of a stopgap, a pit stop to help people. Not that we're great long-term therapists, we are not, but we can be that stand in the gap person, a listening ear, an empathetic ear, and a referral to help somebody get the assistance they need right at this time.
That's really interesting that you brought up the listening to your self-talk, because I know for the past month, I wish I had $5 for every time I've read about imposter syndrome, that a lot of us are going, I never really was good enough, or I couldn't, maybe I just faked it till I got here. And that's been very interesting to hear it's like a groundswell of people feeling that way. Well, on a more hopeful note, which I think we could all use some hope mixed in with our reality and our finding help. What's bringing you hope? And I'm going to ask Kathleen to answer first. What's bringing you hope in a pandemic that's been going on for 15 months?
Oh gosh, lots of things. I think that the greatest source of hope for me is when I look around and I focus on gratitude. Um, I think that because I'm really working with a lot of folks that sometimes feel hopeless, then I kind of try to do the opposite and spend some time on what do I need to be grateful for. And sometimes those are very small things. Sometimes it's the fact that I'm taking the time to watch an avocado grow, or the birds that are out now. I have a bird feeder. I actually look at birds. I never thought about looking at birds. In fact, I thought bird watchers must be strange people that are super bored and don't have much purpose, and extremely judgmental about all kinds of things. Listen to me. But I have such a different, renewed perspective about some very small things, realizing they're not so small. And my relationships have definitely changed. And my perspective on things, material things and people, I'm very grateful for many things. So I think that that brings me hope and that inspires me. And I'm noticing that people around me seem to be doing that as well, even though there sometimes is a flip side, that sometimes there's sadness and lots of adjustment and lots of pain. There's, at the core, there is some kind of gratefulness, which brings hope.
Yeah, we had a question, we asked our staff, which things help you get through the pandemic, and the questions were all over the place. One of my favorites was, one of them, she said, family, rosé, and prayer, not necessarily in that order.
That is very funny.
Yeah.
You know, I would say, you know, I'm just amazed. I feel there's been an increased spirit of aloha in Hawaii, and that the community is really pulling together in a very difficult time. And I know for our church, which is normally into service, we're more into food distribution and volunteerism than ever before. You know, whether it was the food pantry or the food bank or Wounded Warriors. You know, we're just the service level has just ratcheted up, and we're giving more money than ever to those in need. And I know for me personally, I know this is an amazing confession for a Pake person, but I normally give like a 15% tip. But now it's like, I got to help these waiters, you know, they've been out of business. I'll give a 20% tip, which is like a miracle, you know, for Pakes. So, and like I'm at a counter and they're giving me a takeout box. I never tipped people who give me a takeout box. Like, I'll give them a 20% tip because I want them to have a job. And so I think that's changed in me, but I think it's changed in a lot of people's lives in the population. And that gives me hope. I think there's an increased aloha spirit.
So to piggyback on that, you know, this pandemic has been felt all over the world. And it's been shared all over the world with Facebook and all these social medias. So in many ways, it brings me hope that as a world, right, we have a shared experience. Even though there are some divisions, there is that unity that brings us together, that, hey, we are experiencing this as a human race. And that just brings me a lot of hope. And the other part of that is the resiliency that we have seen, right, in all walks of life, from little kids to adults to, you know, old age. And it's really great to see that spirit. And also, it gives us a time to be innovative, right? So, you know, Dr. Coffey was saying, hey, we have to do some changes in our practice because we need to support, you know, creative things and how we can continue to support each other, you know, through this pandemic. So in many ways, it kind of awakened a lot of different things that we may have never experienced if this did not, you know, happened. So in ways, it brought me hope that it brought us closer together.
And Robbie, if I could add one more thing, and just to piggyback on what Josie just said, is that there's been an increase entrepreneurialism, and so, like I said, our church went down to like 120 people, and we used to be 1,200. But when we went online, it jumped to 2,400, and reaching like 27 countries, which we never would have had normally. And it's crazy. We did a conference recently, and people were coming in live from Malawi and Iceland and China, and they were listening in, and we never would have had that penetration before. But it's because of this new entrepreneurial spirit, understanding the digital online, and how we could reach people in a new way. We produced a song just to encourage people called "The Blessing," and we got 1.1 million views from 87 countries, including Hawaii and in a USA. So it's just a whole new age of how we've tried to respond to this.
For sure. Go ahead, Dr. Coffey. What are the things that are bringing you hope?
Well, every day, my patients, they're just an amazing example of, what Dr. Harita is saying is that resilient spirit is coming through. And, these are intimate conversations that are had hour by hour, where they are just hanging in there and thriving and really prioritizing themselves, their family, and their community. And in doing so very thoughtfully. I think this has really been a level setter. It's been very, very humbling, this experience, and it's allowed people to rearrange the furniture in their psychic room. They're like throwing out what doesn't matter and prioritizing pieces that do. And it's an honor to be watching that process. I'm also very encouraged by my little team at the Honolulu Psychology Collective, because we've had to get together via Zoom and support each other. We would normally be crossing each other in the hallways of our offices and things like that, but we haven't been able to do that. So we try to stay together, and they give me so much hope and optimism too. It's like a little band of mental health warriors, and I just love their spirit and courage, and because we've all kind of been depleted at times or other, so then there's this like springing of support that's just really very nice. That's that aloha spirit definitely coming through so palpably. People are smiling, and you can see it in the eyes. I used to think we wouldn't be able to see it through a mask, but you can see it in the eyes. It's a lovely thing.
I just saw really something that reminded me of your description about resilience. About someone said that it was being able to adapt through trauma or something difficult and spring back. And I think it's been really encouraging to see a lot of the springing back in different ways. I know I've been fortunate to interview a lot of the people who are staying on the front lines and helping out, including our grocery store cashiers who've stuck with it, and the people who've been working with the Micronesian communities, and just so many. And they are just, they are telling the story of people are stopping to thank them who never would have stopped to thank them before. And so that's really nice. Miss Lisa, did you have anything you wanted to add in hope?
For me, I think hope, because I teach a lot of classes on self-care, coping skills, and resiliency. So for me, it's about each individual person building that within themselves so that the community becomes stronger. And I see so many people joining us, sharing what's really working for them. And I think that the word that Kathleen used, which is so powerful, was that intentional. It's intentional healing. It's asking yourself, like, what do I need? What am I not getting? And how can I do that? And so I hear people now saying, like, I'm going to the beach to watch the sunset, when they would just drive home because they were too busy. But now they're being very, very intentional about, let me reconnect with nature. Let me create something special in this quiet 10 minutes, this quiet 5 minutes. And I think that that is amazing. Dr. Coffey was talking about this reset. And I think in this midst of upheaval, it's a huge opportunity to kind of have this quality put back into our lives. And so for me, that is huge on hope. And I am really glad and grateful to watch other people's processes in creating that, because I'm like, oh, I want to do that too. So that's why I'm always like, find your joy, then lean into it and share it, because someone else is going to love it just as much as you.
Wow, thank you. That's very powerful. One of the things that people have been talking about in addition to COVID is the kind of year we've had. What different ways are people responding to this year full of COVID, upheaval, and social injustice? You folks have already talked about some of them, how people have been coming together, being resilient, showing aloha. But are there other things that you really wanted to, I mean, such a tumultuous year. I mean, I'm happy to say, as somebody who's a real political junkie, that people channeled some of that energy into voting. We had record voting in the state of Hawaii, and there was a lot of voting across our country. So that's one of the things that I took heart from. What are are there other issues from this year that you wanted to tackle and talk about before we get to questions from our audience? I don't want to call you out because I'm not sure who has something, so you can just.
I would just say that there was so many things that were happening last year, and I think when we look at our community as a whole, we did really embody that aloha spirit, and so that was something great to see. But there was still some separation, some kind of drawing of the lines. And I heard this really great quote this morning where they were talking about your yard neighbor, your community neighbor, your political neighbor, even like your ocean neighbor, that we're all really interconnected. And so to be responsible for what kind of material through social media that you are consuming, but also what you're sharing. Try to find things that are less divisive. We want people to be educated, informed, and yes, absolutely to advocate, but to also do it respectfully and to allow there to be different opinions that are coming from really strong, healthy places, to be able to sit together, because we want as many voices at the table as possible. And when we start to have that divisive experience of feeling separated, and that's you and this is me, then those voices don't get to sit together. And that's the power of that. So that would be my big thing, is to find a way to reconnect, find a way to find common ground, but then still advocate for the things that you're passionate about. We can have both.
For sure. I know my kids brought home from school that tell me one good thing, one bad thing about your day. And we were doing some of that. Sometimes that helps because I have a close relative who has very strong political views and sometimes doesn't always have a chance to talk about it. And my job, I have no political views outwardly facing. So I always want to ask him questions about things. And, well, why do you think that? What do you think? And then I realized that sometimes he just needed to have someone listen to him, and listening is such a big thing.
I think this is like a really complex question, because on one hand, I think because of COVID, we just have less tolerance for more frustration and pain. And so we might speak out more against racial injustice, or we might speak out more on global warming or Capitol breach or the wildfires that are happening, and or the presidential election. And so we just said, that's it, we're going to say something. On the other hand, I think it could make things worse because we have less tolerance and patience. We can be a bit more harsh and a little more caustic and stinging, and that then we get into our echo chambers where I'm only going to watch this news media because I can't handle the responsibility and actually holding things in tension of hearing both sides. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, I think it made us rise to social justice, but it could also make us rise to more prejudice.
For sure. I think we're getting some really good questions from our audience. Here's our first one. The pandemic has interrupted our lives for nearly 15 months. If it ended tomorrow, realistically, how long should we expect it to take to heal, to feel safe, to feel settled again? Will it take as long as the whole pandemic, or maybe even longer? Are we going to feel normal again? Which, Dr. Josie, did you lean forward because you'd like to answer that?
Oh, wow. It's really hard to answer that because in many ways, the norm has changed, right? And so to kind of say, I want to feel the way I felt before the pandemic, I don't know if we'll have that feeling because, we changed a lot during this pandemic. Like we talked about this hour, right? It's just The community has changed, the world has changed. And so that idea of normalcy will need to change. As far as the length, I mean, healing is always a dynamic thing, right? Because like anything else, think something else can happen. And so healing is a continuous thing. But the real important, I guess, focus is how do we kind of reconnect again? Because this whole pandemic has really just separated us from, our support system. And so in a way, how can we start kind of getting those peoples in our lives again so that we can start healing? Because part of the pain is being disconnected. And so the faster we get back into our, community, our nation, then the faster I think we can have that new normalcy. Um, but yeah, it's a really difficult question. I wasn't wanting to answer right away because I wanted to have time to think about it, but that's
I think that was really important, and thank you for letting me put you on the spot first. I think what my takeaway from listening to your answer, though, was that I would not have thought of as a layperson is that healing is a process. I think us lay people sort of seem to think it's either on or it's off. You're broken or you're fixed. You're not feeling well and you're on your way to feeling better. So thinking of it as a process, I find that helpful because, as you said, we've all been changed by this, and some ways have been good. There's some things we want to hang on to, and other things we would like to say goodbye to for a long time. So that's interesting to me that's how you think. Anybody else want to tackle a section of this?
Well, I want to add on to what Dr. Harita is saying. I'm sorry, Kathleen.
Oh, no, go ahead.
You first, she's next.
But I wanted to add about that connection. I think we're better together, and there have been so many things that divided us. But as we begin to come back together, the language that we use needs to be very, very, we need to be careful in the way that we speak to each other. And I think we've been reckless. There's been some recklessness with the depictions of others and the experience that some folks have had. And when we do begin to approach our community and our family as we weave ourselves back together, I would just like to ask people to not minimize the experience of our friends and family. I mean, people have died. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. There's a lot of grief there, so to not minimize those experiences. And also we should not blame each other for feeling or being in the situation that we're in. A lot of things are circumstantial, and it's not a person's fault for feeling the way they feel or having the experiences that they have. And then there's just flat out denial that certain experiences are being had at all. And so when we do approach, to be careful to not blame, minimize, or deny anyone's experience over the last year or the last several years, or maybe even their lifetime. So that is a twofer that's both coming together and also about some of those social justice issues. Being more curious and inviting the conversation is, I think, the way forward.
Okay, Kathleen, when go on.
I love those two responses to the question. The only thing I was going to add is that how individual it all is. So for example, with the question is how long maybe it would take. I just think it depends on so many variables, right? It depends on what kind of other trauma history there is in a person's path. It depends on resilience factors. It depends on what circumstance the person's going back to, kind of what the normal was for the person before. I just think that we have to give permission to ourselves to, again, be kind of gentle with ourselves, that it's very individual. So what I'm going to experience kind of going back to a pre-COVID time is going to be different than my neighbor or my sister. So just to be gentle with ourselves. It is very individual, and we can observe trends and patterns and kind of estimate some things, but please be gentle, because it really is it's individual.
I really like that, Kathleen. That's really, really good. And I like what you said, Robbie, that in a sense it's not an on-off switch. It's more like a dimmer switch. And so there are going to be gradations of how we're going to get better. But a dimmer switch also means it can go back the other way and get darker for a moment. But I think it's going to be 7 steps forward and maybe 2 back at times. But we got to think more of, it's not an on-off switch where boom, we're back to normal, but it's more like a dimmer switch.
Yeah, it definitely, it's such a process, and I'm really encouraged by how people are listening more. I know there's time. The other day I was talking with someone, it was just one of those days, and lots of things were going in lots of different directions. And I told my coworker, I said, I'm sorry we haven't connected. It just seems like some weeks we just lurch from one crisis to the next. And she's just like, amen to that. And, I don't think before we would necessarily share that, but that is one of the strangeness of communicating via mostly email and occasional Zoom, is in some ways we cut to the chase a little quicker. And so that's been encouraging, but that's why I love too what Dr. Coffey was saying about being mindful that it's great to be candid. It's great to show your authentic self, but to remember that other people have different experiences. And if I'm being candid about mine, it doesn't mean that I mean to devalue yours. And that seems very valuable for us to talk about. Let's go to another great question from our audience. How long is the wait now for an appointment with a therapist or a psychologist for a new client? And in a virtual world, how can I tell when I find the person who's the right fit for me? How long should it take before I can tell? I know, I would think with these long waiting signs, that's a really great question, as far as you can't really afford to be picky. So I was wondering if who wants to tackle that one first? Dr. Coffey, how about you? I know you have a long line of people. You've been seeing people.
It's a long wait. Unfortunately, depending on which clinician you're trying to make an appointment with, it can be as many as 4 to 6 weeks for a wait. That was one of the reasons why I recommended maybe joining a therapy group. The difference between a group and a class, the groups are mental health oriented, and typically insurance will cover the expense of those. There's a triage and an interview that's involved in that, just to make sure there's a fit. If you take a class, those are more skills-based, and those are not covered by insurance, but they're also very good, especially if it's a communications course or an anger management course. Classes are very valuable as well. In terms of how do you know, I think that mental health is a product, and you, as the consumer, you get your shopping, and you're perfectly allowed to pick a therapist that you can feel comfortable with. Make sure, most of us are in psychology today. You can see our backgrounds, you check our education, you can check our experience, and you might even ask for a testimonial. You ask for friends. I love Hawaii. Word of mouth is very important. And but you don't have to stay with a therapist if you don't feel safe. Now, that doesn't mean that the therapist isn't going to give you some hard news from time to time, but you have to be able to trust us enough to be able to hear that. And if you don't feel that you trust your therapist, it is okay to shop around. You're the consumer. Mental health is very important.
I totally 100% agree with Dr. Coffey. What I have seen just as a profession, especially with the pandemic, there has been a lot of shops that's been closed, especially for individuals that are not very comfortable with Zoom, or that idea of, a different venue of treating patients. So there's been a lot of I guess, changes in that. So we're also experiencing the same change as you. So it is going to take some time to kind of figure out what this new norm is. But as far as the different types of treatment out there, yeah, you just have to just experience it. And who knows, you might be surprised and say, you know what, this wasn't, so bad. Because again, this is something new, and as a whole, we are experiencing it together. And doing it now for a year, yeah, there are going to be some good parts and bad parts, but that's what the whole journey of therapy is all about, is be able to go through that process and say, hey, I don't really know if I like the Zoom thing, so I'm going to go check something out. Or, you know what, oh, I'm so glad that I tried this. So again, it's going to be an experience, and it is going to take some time as we kind of settle into this new norm.
I think people do want to know that it's okay with therapists that you might make an appointment, get in with somebody, and then try somebody different.
We don't have a lot of ego in it. We understand that that changes get made, but I've been doing a soft poll of all of my clients, and 2 or 3% want to return to in-person. Mostly, they really like telehealth. Thinking about traffic, they don't have to, these long traffic lines, there's no parking, they can squeeze it in between their work or school. It's so convenient for them. So, I do have an office and people can come to see me in it, but they're really enjoying telehealth.
That's great to hear that that's been one of those things. Kathleen, can you tell us some other resources besides therapists? In addition to therapists, what are some other resources now?
Sure. Well, and I love that Pastor Dan mentioned worship communities, because so many people go to a worship community for some support. But the Department of Health, I wanted to mention, has a program called Kumakani, and it's crisis counseling. It's just for this COVID-19 time. So it's time limited. It will end in October. So if you would like to reach out for individual or group counseling, and they also have groups, activity groups that are pretty neat around different kinds of topics. You access them through calling Hawaii Cares. So I know we're going to share that number, but it's 1-800-753-6879. When you call Hawaii Cares, ask for Kumakani, and they will send you to one of the 6 calling centers. In every county, there's one, and there's people waiting to take your call. So you can talk story with them about what kind of stressors you're experiencing. And then they also have a website, and you can sign up for different classes. So it's meant to kind of supplement the different crisis services we already have at the Department of Health, and just to try to help during this period of COVID-19 stress.
Thank you. Well, that's a great segue to, I'm going to ask each of you to do one takeaway, one thing you'd like to leave our audience with today. Those are what I joke about. That's the thing, is you're leaving your seminar, you think, this is what I should have said. So here's your time. And I'm going to put the former TV reporter on the spot first. Pastor Dan, can you tell us what's your one takeaway for today?
Just really quickly, it would be like Winston Churchill would say, don't give up, never give up. And I would just put a footnote to that, and reach out to at least one person to communicate how you're doing. And I think those 2 things could make a major difference.
Great. Dr. Coffey, I'll stay in the C's.
We are here for you, and we genuinely want to see you. And I think that when people do finally come to counseling, because that's my wheelhouse, they're really surprised at how fun it is and how comfortable they are, and how safe they feel. And I really want to demystify it. It's not quite like talking story, but kind of. So, do look us up.
Kathleen?
I want to stress balance, that balance, whether it's work and life or work and play, just balance. I hope that you all strive, like I am too, for balance. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Josie, can I get you to go next? And then we'll let Ms. Cisa wrap up the takeaways for now.
Yes, my takeaway is that you're not alone and you don't have to do this alone. And also to find your tribe again. So when I say tribe, I consider this kind of like a tribe where you have those 3 or 4 that you just can, be a community to wrap around you so that you don't feel that you have to struggle through this new change in our human experience. So find your tribe.
Great. Ms. Tisa?
Absolutely. And you've heard me say this throughout the session today, but be okay with the fact that things that used to work may not feel as good now. Find some new joys, lean into them, and then share them. Share that light, share that joy that you're experiencing, because we could all really use it right now. And my big recommendation is we live in such a beautiful place. Take a few moments to go outside, enjoy nature, reconnect, and you'll be surprised how much balance, like Kathleen said, that it can bring into your life.
Yes, I know somebody said just stand in the dirt. And I was like, wow, that's a different way to think about getting grounded. Well, I want to thank all of you so much. We could go on for another hour and it could be so quick, but we can't do that. We promised people we would wrap up in an hour. So I would just like to say mahalo to everyone. And we have some tips. Mahalo to our sponsors, the Kahala Clinic for Children and Family, Brain Health Hawaii, HAIS, and also our community sponsors, NAMI Hawaii and Mental Health America Hawaii. And please use those as great resources because you go to both of their websites, so you have access to classes and things there. Next, if we could also go to some of our own thoughts and the tips we've come together with for all this time. It's okay to feel anxious. Try a lot of these strategies that you've heard about. Take control of what you can, but remember there's lots of things we can't control. Connect to people. When you're feeling stressed, remember that other people are feeling that way too. Sometimes when I'm having a tough day, I just think, who can I reach out to? And you reach out to that one person and it just makes everything better. And I think one of the things we've all come through this thinking about a theme is we are in this together. So let's spread aloha. Thank you for joining us. We have more ways to find help. This will be on our website. If you've signed up, we're going to email this to you and we'll keep in touch and we'll keep talking about these important issues so we can all help each other. We'll be back again in 2 weeks from now with another panel on Life Interrupted, Navigating What's Next. And we look forward to hearing from you again. And we'll invite all of these wonderful people back again. And we're looking forward to having more conversations. So even if I don't have them up here on the screen, we're hoping that they're going to be helping us in the background because we're finding we need help from everyone we can. Thank you so much. Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you.